Okay, well, let's start this DVD by looking at various types of pawn centres that can occur in the opening phase of the game and how play develops naturally from those different types of centre. And the first one I want to look at is the so-called classical pawn centre, where one or other player sets up pawns in the middle on d4 and e4 or d5 and e5. Of course, with black it's much rarer that you are able to do that. My first game is between Anton Korobov, playing white, 2-6-6-0, and Dragan Solak, 2-6-1-3. And this game comes from the Moscow Aeroflot Open in 2012. White is soon able to set up the classical pawn centre. Well, the opening is the very common Slav defence to the Queen's Gambit. Black's position is very solid, reliable and flexible, and this is why a lot of strong players choose this setup. And now d takes c4 is one of the main lines. Now white can already establish the classical pawn centre here by playing e4. But this can lead to very sharp play, as black is able to defend his pawn on c4 by playing b5. This is the so-called Geller Gambit, named after a famous Russian player, Yefim Geller, famous grandmaster, who was renowned for his theoretical contributions to chess. Not many players play this way with white these days, very strong players, because it's risky. You're giving up a pawn, all hell breaks loose after e5, knight d5 and then a4. Very sharp positions arise, but black is thought to be okay in this situation. And I think the main reason is that white has been forced to advance in the centre slightly too quickly, which has given black the opportunity to put a knight in on d5. I think when you get the classical pawn centre, let's say like this with e4, pawns on d4 and e4, you really want to leave them there for as long as possible because they cramp the opponent. You might be thinking about e5, you might be thinking about d5, but I think you prefer to develop your pieces first, behind those pawns, consolidate the centre and then move forward a bit later. So that's why, going back to the game, white plays a4. He's just threatening e4, and at the same time he prevents black from playing b5. And now Solak plays a rather unusual move, a5. Unusual because black has many options here. One very common option is to play bishop f5. And as you can see, a clear motivation behind that move is to stop white from playing e4. I think that's the most common move here. Black can play bishop g4, black can play knight a6. All these moves have been tried. a5 is an interesting suggestion of Yasha Murray, a very inventive grandmaster who now lives in France. The main merit of that move is that it fixes the b4 square. Black's thinking about perhaps occupying that square, maybe with his bishop on f8, or perhaps even with his knight. That knight can come easily into b4 via a6. I remember Murray playing some games of this 20 or 30 years ago and confounding his opponents. The drawback of the move is, of course, it's rather slow, and it allows white to form the classical pawn centre without tears with e4. Okay, black comes out to pin the knight, white regains his pawn, and now black plays pawn up to e6. So here we see a typical classical pawn centre there from white. And the rules for these positions can be established. If you own the centre, you have to be able to consolidate the centre from attack by developing your pieces to the correct squares. You use the centre to cramp the enemy development. And you have to be ready to advance the centre at the right moment to start an attack. More complex is what happens when you're playing against the centre. You have to be able to place your pieces aggressively to prevent this type of consolidation that white is trying to enact in this position. You have to try to destabilise the centre. For instance, if we return to our Geller Gambit, we saw black encouraging white to destabilise the centre straight away by simply protecting his pawn on c4. This type of centre is only strong when it's sufficiently protected and is able to move forward at the right moment. So let's see in this game whether black is able to mess white around and force him to move forward perhaps earlier than he would otherwise like. And well, white decides to castle here, which is quite an interesting move. There are other moves in this position. I think of the alternative, so I'd slightly prefer bishop e3 for white here. The main reason is that when black plays as he does in the game, bishop takes f3, we can actually take with the queen because we've protected our pawns. Now, the thing about castles is it allows black to play bishop takes f3, when if white doesn't want to lose the pawn on d4, he's got to take back with a pawn. But of course, Korobov, being a 2660 player, grandmaster, he knows exactly what he's doing by going into this position. Although it's not exactly an approach I can recommend to weaker players, because white has had to accept double pawns next to his own king. So this is a very interesting judgment call by white. He knew that black would play bishop takes f3. He's allowed it. He is reckoning on black's pieces being so passive that they can't get anywhere near his king. I mean, a weakness is a weakness only when it can be attacked. So can black really think about mating white on g2 or occupying f4 with a knight or somehow attacking these double pawns? Well, with all his pieces on the back rank, not for some time to come. So white maintains his classical centre by these means, and he's hoping with his next move, king h1, to attack the black position. Now, king h1 is also a very interesting move because white is intending to go rook g1. The open g file can be of great use. The point is now that black's played a5. Is he really going to cast on the queen side when he's played this move? No. So where's he going to put his king if he doesn't castle short? And if he castles short, he's castling straight into a white attack. We'll learn later on that one of the benefits of double pawns are supposed to be bad, is that you get an open file next to the double pawns, or a half open file, which you can often use. So here, white is using that open file, half open file, for his rook to try and get after black's king. Well, Solak castles. His position can be thought of as solid but passive. White moves in with bishop h6, and black plays the only move here, knight to e8. And now, having forced the knight backwards, white moves his bishop back to e3. So this pawn centre is really cramping black's style. He'd like to somehow destabilise the centre here. How can he do it? Well, he can think about playing e5 at the right moment. He can think about playing c5 at the right moment. But it doesn't seem like there's going to be a good moment for either of those moves in the near future. So white maintains an advantage in space. He's got two nice bishops. He's got the open g file. His king is perfectly safe on h1. White has the edge in this position. Black is passive. So black plays g6. Of course, it's not lost. But you have to be extremely patient with black in these positions. Solak remains patient. He tries to put his bishop on a better diagonal. And now white consolidates his centre with rook ad1. White still hasn't found the right moment to move forward yet, so he's keeping his centre intact. Black brings his knight up to d6, attacking the bishop. And when you've got more space, you don't really want exchanges in this position. We don't want black taking off that bishop with his knight, so white just keeps his bishop. Black patiently retreats, possibly thinking about bringing his queen out to h4 at some point, so white stops that. Queen comes to c7, and now, with black cramped and really unable to break free, white starts an interesting action against the black king. I like this game because it really is an excellent demonstration of how to use a dominating centre to cramp the opponent and then start action on the other side of the board. Of course, what black needs in this position is some way of confusing matters to stop white from this automatic kingside attack. But black lacks an effective way to attack the white centre, as we've seen. So here he goes. He's trying to attack that pawn on d4 with his queen. White moves the bishop back to counter-attack the knight on d6. And please note, both of these knights in the d file are unprotected, which again stops black from pushing his pawns up to destabilise white's centre. So black is still in trouble here. Black moves into the hole on b4, and white now opens up the king side. So h takes g6, h takes g6, rook to g4. It's interesting, white has a completely free hand here on the king side. because black has no play. So knight b6, the play is coming very slowly. Black is now attacking this pawn on a4. He's perhaps thinking about putting a knight into c4 to create some counterplay. Now white is very calm. He just plays king to g2. Knight d c4. And now another very calm move, bishop c1. e5. Okay, well, it had to come to this. I mean, if black just remained passive, white would just shunt all his pieces onto the king side in good time, his major pieces, and checkmate on the h-file, or something like that. There'd be a moment where both white rooks would be on the h-file, white would play bishop h6 at the right moment, chop on g7, and then the black king would be stripped bare. So black knows this, he understands this. It's like looking over the horizon in a game of chess. You understand what's coming, so he must take action, and he plays e5. But that allows white to move forward at the right moment and to create a strong passed pawn. Rook a d8. Black brings his rook into the game. And now here we are, this idea mentioned earlier, rook h1. White's working with tactics all the time in this position, and he notes that black cannot win a pawn here simply because his knight position is undermined. There we are, we see that knight on c4 is lost because it's pinned against the queen. So black has to block the position with c5, and now two things have happened. Number one, the passed pawn on d5 has become an unchallengeable tower of strength. Number two, and this is probably worse, the black queen's been cut off from any possible defence. So now it really is time to up the gears, and white doubles rooks on the h-file and moves in with his rook. f6, maybe to let the king out. f4, very good indeed. The main merit of this move is to let the white queen in. So white's piling in now with his pieces. Pawn up to g5, and the nightmare scenario for black has occurred. All of white's major pieces on the g-file, piling in. The simple threat, let's see, rook takes g7 must be a threat. Queen g6 is a threat. Black can scarcely defend himself. He tried king f8. Queen g6 is totally forcing. Black played rook d7, and now the final attack's very nicely played. Rook takes g7, rook takes g7, rook h8 check, king e7, queen takes, g7 check, and black resigned. So very nice game by white, very nice. And it shows the effectiveness of the classical pawn centre when the opponent can't get counterplay against it. Note in the final position, white's central pawns remain on the board. That pawn on d5 cramps black to the very end, and we have to say that black had very little counterplay throughout this well-played game.